In this lesson, we'll start copying our rocket geometry and some of our pyro simulations onto our POPs points. So last lesson, remember, we made our POP simulation. I'm going to step out of here. I'm going to go ahead and put down a new geometry object. I'm going to call this rocket anim. And this is where we're going to copy our rocket geometry we made earlier onto our POPs points. Go in here, delete the file swap. Do an object merge, tell it to do into this object. We want to get our POP simulation, so go to POPs launch points, POPs points, and call this POPs points, so we know what it's doing. We want one more object merge. We're going to use this one to get our rocket geometry. So again, into this object, close that, go to our rocket geo, rocket out. It's got our rocket out, and if we look here, there's our rocket. Call this rocket geo. So now that we have these, let's go ahead and just put down a copy stop and see what we get. So we want to wire this into the first input for primitive to copy, and wire the points into the second input for template to copy to. We'll display from that. Scrub a few frames, press space G to center on our object, and you can see we have our rockets copied onto our points. However, there's two things wrong. First off, the rockets are facing the wrong direction, and secondly, the orientation is not being applied. They're all, facing in this steady direction, whereas they should be arcing along with the points. So there's two things we can do to fix that. First off, the general direction can be fixed by just putting a transform here and going up to the rotate and transforming the Y in the -90, and that's going to at least get our rockets facing away from our rocket launcher. If I put our rocket launcher right here, you can see now they're at least facing the right direction, but the orientation is still wrong. And the reason for this is the way orientation is calculated in the copy is that it calculates it based on normal and the up vector. I brought up this help right here. You can see orienting in the copy, they use the n for the z-axis, and it uses the up vector for y-axis. Now the normal attribute we made earlier is not really going to work for this. However, if you don't have a normal attribute, it will use the velocity, and that velocity is correct on our points, and it would be much preferable for us to use our velocity vector rather than our normal vector to do this orientation. So what I'm going to do, go ahead and drop down a attribute stop and just kill our normal vector. And now you see the points have updated and they're now getting the correct orientation. They're arcing correctly and the rockets are moving in the right direction. Let's call this delete n. And that's all we really need for setting up the rocket geometry. I'm going to step out of there. I'm going to create a new geometry object and call this rocket fire anim. Let's go ahead and take the rocket fire that we made earlier and put it at the edge of our rockets. Let's delete that. Do an object merge. This is going to get our POPs points. So into this object, we want to get the POPs points. All right, I got the POPs points. Doing our object merge, and let's get our rocket fire. Call this rocket fire, and come down here, find our rocket fire out, hit accept. Let me turn this off. Space G, the center, and there's our rocket fire. So again, let's put a copy down and just see what we get right out of the gate. You can see here our fire is copied, but the orientation again is kind of messed up. So there's a few things we need to do to get this orientation facing the right way. The first thing we want to do is we want to do its orientation based off the velocity. So let's kill that normal again. Del N. As you can see right now, they're getting oriented correctly, but they're starting off pretty much facing the wrong direction. So let's put a transform over here for the initial, sorry, that's a trail. transform over here, and we're going to want to rotate these initially 90 in the X, which is going to have them facing the wrong way, and if we completely rotate them in the Y, now they're all facing the correct direction. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like when we have the rockets displayed as well. You see there's two things wrong here. First off, the fire is probably too big, and secondly, it's berthing off the point right here, which is in the middle of the rocket. So again, there's two things we can do to fix this. Let's go back into the rocket anim. We're going to want to push the rocket along by about 3 frames when it's instanced. That way, the instancing point is at the edge of the rocket, so the things like the fire and the trail will berth off the point right here and not in the middle of the rocket. So that fixes the first problem. Second thing is the trail is probably a little too big, or the fire is a little bit too big. So let's put down there transform, not the trail, transform, and just scale this down about 0.5. And now our rocket fire is a little bit more reasonable. So there's one more thing we want to do here. When these rockets hit the ground, you see that the fire is still on, and we don't want that. So one thing we can do to fix this is use those attributes we made earlier with those pop wrangles to kill the fire once it hits the ground. So we're going to drop down a attribute create. And if I middle mouse over here, you see we have our first hit attribute. However, our first hit attribute is not mapped to it does not have a custom variable mapping yet. So let's go ahead and make that. We're going to tell us to read the first hit attribute. We're going to want its mapping to be first hit. Now first hit is initially an integer, so change this to integer, and we don't want to write the value, so turn that off. So that just turns this mapping on. Let's go into our copy SOP. We're going to come over to stamp, and we want to stamp inputs. And this is how we're going to convey to our primitive over here, or I guess this case a volume, but according to the copy SOP, it's a primitive to copy, that it can kill this object when this attribute gets to a certain point. In this particular case, if I open up the spreadsheet and I go to the first hit attribute, you'll see that once it hits, it becomes some number, but if it hasn't hit yet, it's set to 0. So what I can do is I can come in here and make a variable called first hit and just have it set to $first hit. And then on this side of the copy SOP, we can use a delete SOP and put an expression in here that reads that first hit attribute. And the way we read a stamped attribute, we use the expression stamp. We tell it the copy SOP to look at, which is right now just called copy1, the stamp variable to look at, and then just a default value in case it doesn't find anything. If it says if it's not equal to 0, the point is not equal to 0, then delete it. And so now you see when these rockets hit the ground, the fire turns off properly. So that is how we get our rocket and our rocket fire onto our POPs points. In the next lesson, we will start using the custom attributes we made to birth pyro simulations at the correct time for our effect.